I did a whole live stream on submission,
Mhm.
defining the word itself, not the
Okay.
dynamic between male and female, but just the
Okay.
word itself.
Okay.
Um, and obviously, it didn't get it. Like, it's not going to blow up because I'm
Mhm.
sitting there for an hour and a half defining a single word. That's
Mhm.
what I love doing is just diving
Mhm.
into what does the word mean, people.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, um, you have some issues with black men and their need for submission from women, and of course, you use the argument of like, or at least you pointed out that women having their own money and they're being more successful. And I
Mhm.
started doing a little bit of digging. I'm like, well, it doesn't seem that the average black woman is that much. I don't think she's making more money. The average black woman is not making more money than the average black man.
Mhm.
So I don't see a lot of data for that.
Mhm.
I think it's like 9% of women make over
Mhm.
100 grand a year.
Mhm.
So I'm not seeing a lot of data that supports that out. But
Mhm.
of course, you have your anecdotal experience as well. But
Mhm.
did you want to speak to submission, and did you have a working definition of submission itself?
So I would say that I just kind of go based on like the dictionary definition of submission.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was the simplest way for me because I feel like I've heard so many different conversations about submission, and
Right.
everyone seems to have their own definition of it. And I just don't, I don't know, I just don't see what they're defining as
Mm-hmm.
submission sometimes. Like people talk about, like, I want someone who's cooperative. Like, yeah, that's cool. Just being cooperative doesn't mean you're submitting to that person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also think that with how submission works, like I was watching, did you see the clip? It went viral. It was Sham Booty and some woman, what was her name? Jazzy or something. She's linked to Cam Newton, I think. And she was talking about
I
how
probably
she's,
did.
I'm
Yeah.
sure you did. I'm sure you did. And
Yeah.
she was talking about how, like,
She
you
missed
know,
the Cam Newton or something.
yeah, but she was talking about how she was like, I predict his needs and I do this and it's a 1, 2, 3 count. And she was like,
Mm-hmm.
and I do anal for him and I don't
Bless
enjoy
her.
it. Yes. And she was like, I don't enjoy it. And I'm like, is this what y'all are and I remember I saw another TikTok where someone was like, my boyfriend sent this to me. I was like, oh Lord have mercy.
Lord.
Yeah. And so like I think with submission, like I would never describe myself as submissive,
Mm-hmm.
but like I feel like I am cooperative, like I am agreeable, but
Mm-hmm.
like am I just going to do something cuz you tell me to do it? No. Like we have
Yeah.
to consider if what you're asking me to do makes sense for me. You know what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I disagree with it, and I think that the conversation of submission comes up a lot with like black women in particular, and yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that like you brought up, like, black women aren't making more than black men on average, which is true, but I think it's the fact that women are making something, period, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
before where you're reliant on men to open a bank account, or simple things like
Mm-hmm.
just access to independence was through a man, which doesn't happen anymore. You have your independence, you have your money. It might not be 6 or 7 figures, but it's still something, and you're still able to live on your own without help, which is why I feel like submission doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. Like, because if you split off with this person, you're gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you giving that person your agency, your personhood, for what reason?
Here's a question before I, because your boy can tangent for hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
Before I go into my little spiel,
Hmm.
do you think is there ever a case where a man should submit to a woman?
Where a man should submit to a woman?
Mm.
Not really, in my opinion.
So
Like,
you think submission shouldn't be done either way? The word submission is not useful in relationship.
I don't think it is. But that's just because because this is my personal opinion.
Help us, help us.
And I feel like I prefer egalitarian relationships as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to relationships built on submission. So it's like if you're doing something for someone, it's because you've determined that like you deserve this, right? And I'm gonna do this for you because I feel like, all who you are and what you do for me and all this stuff, like you're worthy of this, as opposed to like the woman is dictating how you're supposed to behave, what you're supposed to do, what your responsibilities are. I don't, or the man is doing that. Like, I don't believe that that makes sense anymore.
Mm-hmm. So, in the interest of utilizing the Socratic method, which I'm also a
Mhm,
fan of, I noticed one of
mhm,
your TikToks made light of it.
mhm.
Allow me to use it on you.
Okay.
So, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to give you an example of what I'm kind
Okay.
of referring to,
Mhm.
or how it contradicts what I think you're going to say.
Okay.
And it's a bit leading, but
Mhm.
it is what it is.
Okay.
Um, Can you think of an example of an egalitarian relationship in your daily life? Comma, when you think about your own podcast,
Mhm.
again, shout out Safe Space Podcast. You
Mhm.
understand? Look her
Mhm.
up, subscribe, all that.
Mhm.
Um, when you have guests, when you have your friends on, and
Mhm.
they're on your podcast,
Mhm.
do they not submit to your lead of, like, right now you've been somewhat cooperative, like, and I want to say somewhat cooperative,
Mhm.
you've been following my lead in terms
Mhm.
of I'm asking the questions, you're kind of
Mhm.
deferring to me as I lead the conversation.
Mhm.
When they come on your podcast, you lead the conversation, you
Mhm.
kind of determine the topics that, of course,
Mhm.
they might bring questions or comments, and you
Mhm.
guys kind of work in collaboration.
Mhm.
But it's your mics, it's your equipment, it's your
Mhm.
channel, it's your
Mhm.
password,
Mhm.
it's your monetization,
Mhm.
it's your stuff,
Mhm.
your TikTok.
Yeah.
So when I talk about the word submission, and again,
Mhm.
I'll let you answer, but like when I think of submission, I think of more of there has to be somebody. Like in this country, we submit to the president,
Mhm.
everyone.
Mhm.
And even though the president submits to Congress and
Mhm.
Supreme Court and
Mhm.
the Senate, everyone submits to someone. We just
Mhm.
may not call it that. The word might be
Okay.
demonized at this point where we just don't like
Mhm.
the word itself.
Yeah.
But I believe that in any given dynamic, there's a hierarchy. There's
Mhm.
somebody who's holding the steering wheel,
Mhm.
and even though the person next to me is equal to me, and
Mhm.
they're holding the map, or they're holding their phone and saying, "All right, turn left here. There's a faster way."
Mhm.
They don't grab the steering wheel and make you turn left. The person
Mm.
driving has to turn the wheel left.
Mhm.
So everyone in that car submits to the person holding the steering wheel, even though we
Mhm.
can still give backseat driving tips and,
Mhm.
"Bruh, watch out for that cop over there," and,
Mhm.
"Bruh, yield here." We can give all this feedback,
Mhm.
but there's still one person holding the steering wheel. And I think
Mhm.
in any given relationship, there can't be four people in the car. Everyone's giving directions.
Mhm.
Everyone's touching the steering wheel.
Mhm.
Somebody has to be in charge of this, because
Mm.
if we
Mhm.
go into a ditch, we gotta have somebody to blame, bruh.
Yeah.
Who was
Yeah.
driving?
Mhm.
We can be drunk in the back seat. We
Mhm.
can't be in the front seat drunk.
Yeah.
So that person in the front is held responsible, and often
Mhm.
in the traditional monogamous, dynamic, it's the
Mhm.
man who's responsible for protecting his family, providing
Mhm.
for his family.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of variation, a lot of nuances as far as women working too. It's
Mhm.
not that cut and dry.
Mhm.
But when things go wrong, 2 in the morning, somebody's breaking in, the man says, "Yo, go get the kids." Do you sit
Mhm.
there? Well, I'm just because you told me to do something, I'm not gonna
Mhm.
go.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't even think about it. We would just
Mhm. Mhm.
in the military. This is the last example I give. In the military, I submit every single day.
Mhm.
If somebody tells me, "Yo, I know it's Sunday, but stop your live stream, come to
Mhm.
work," I would stop. I thank y'all for joining me. I press the button and I go to work,
Uh-huh.
because
Uh-huh.
it doesn't matter if it's male or female.
Mhm.
I understand that the hierarchy I'm in, I have to submit to the level right above me, or
Mhm.
above them, or above
Mhm.
them, just because I understand the consequences of not doing so. I understand the
Mhm.
system I volunteered to come into.
Mhm.
It's not based on how much I know. It's based on the system I'm in. And so the chain
Mhm.
of command dictates who's in charge. And so it
Mhm.
could be somebody fresh out of high school,
Mhm.
and fresh out of college,
Mhm.
a brand new lieutenant, 18
Mhm.
years old. If he tells 29-year-old Ray, go outside and rake the leaves, it's lawful order. I
Yeah.
grab me a rake, I go out
Mhm.
there and start raking leaves.
Mhm.
It's just the system I'm in. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of people have demonized the word submission, mainly because it has these connotations of control or abuse of power, which those
Mhm.
things do exist.
Mhm.
But back to the analogy that I kind of mentioned, do you believe that you have any egalitarian or equal relationships in your life that are without a given hierarchy or one person in charge?
I would say my parents have been a really good example of an egalitarian relationship where
Mm-hmm.
um even when they disagree, like no one is like this my word is the last word, right? They figure
Mm-hmm.
out kind of a way to compromise. And I think having seen that in my personal life, it makes it like when we have these conversations about submission, I just can't like I see what you're saying, right?
Mm.
But in a personal relationship, I'm like, I don't see where how it really could exist for me, right? Where I am just like, well, I mean, you're in charge of me. I'm like, like I'm my own person. Like, hold on. Like, I get the perspective of like, well, somebody breaks in the house, like, I could try to fight, but
See,
would it make sense? You know what I'm
right.
saying? Whereas like if I have a a strong dude with me, I'm like, all right, go ahead, you got it. Like we're more likely to survive if
Right.
he's fighting than if I'm fighting. So I think there's like that common sense part of it where it's like to a degree, like there's only so much I can do to protect a household. I don't even know how to use a gun for real.
Lord helper.
Yeah. So like I'm pretty much I'll be in the back with the kids. Like,
Mm.
I'm willing to just do that because it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? But like in terms of like kind of like the decisions that I feel like might require two heads instead of one person just being like, I'm the leader. Like, I do think that an egalitarian partnership just works better, at least for me.
I hear you,
Mhm,
and it may come down to semantics because I think we agree with each other. And
mhm,
this dynamic currently is a perfect
mhm,
example
mhm,
of how technically you're submitting to me
mhm.
because it's my podcast.
Yeah.
But at no point have you not been able to give your free opinion. You've
Mhm,
been pushing back. I've been pushing back. It's
mhm,
been a conversation, and I'm sure
mhm,
we're both taking away something from this
mhm,
to at least think about. You can go make your TikToks and be like,
mhm.
he says something that I don't know where you got it from, but it sounds trash as hell. It don't make no sense.
Uh-huh.
But in this dynamic, if I came to your podcast and I'm
Mhm,
on your couch or I'm on one of your
mhm,
chairs,
mhm,
I defer to you. I
mhm,
automatically in this environment,
mhm,
she's in charge. This is her
mhm,
podcast. This is her environment where she's on top of the hierarchy,
mhm.
and that exists everywhere we go. If we go to
Yeah.
Chipotle,
Mhm,
right? They can spit in my food, so I probably should, be kind and be cooperative and
mhm,
not be loud and, and,
mhm,
and do what they say do. If I go
mhm,
to a hospital, they hold my life in their hands. If
mhm,
I'm in the military, I have a supervisor, I have a
mhm,
flight chief, I have a
mhm,
commander,
mhm,
and they direct your day, they direct your 8 hours or however
mhm,
long you're there.
mhm,
So I think in any environment we go in, we can easily change out the words and say, well, it's really kind of it's not submission, it's more so cooperation.
mhm,
I think they go together. They
mhm,
correlate perfectly.
mhm,
And I think the conversation itself should be more so identifying what the word means and
mhm,
saying, yeah, we do this often. We're doing it
mhm,
now.
mhm,
You're amazing at it.
mhm.
This has been an
Thank you.
enjoyable conversation. I've had
Yes.
some
Mhm,
interviews that are just kind of she's short or she's kind of mean or he doesn't really want to talk or he
mhm,
doesn't want to talk about that itself and he'll kind
mhm.
of dance around it.
Yeah.
There's some interviews that are just I'm like, bro, this is a chore. Whereas
Yeah.
this has been enjoyable. You're not
Mhm,
abrasive whatsoever. You've been able to push back respectfully.
mhm,
And honestly, I have a high tolerance for, if you raise your voice on here, I'm like, I
mhm,
wouldn't be like, oh my God, bro, why?
mhm,
You've been enjoyable to talk to.
mhm,
That's what I consider submission is that you just
mhm,
understood this is his podcast. So I'm
mhm,
not going to go on there and act a fool. You could
mhm,
easily say a ton of words that get me
mhm.
demonetized.
Yeah.
We're live. So
Yeah.
you could easily say some wild stuff. You start
Mhm,
playing music and get the video
mhm,
demonetized, all those things. But
mhm,
you're choosing not to every
mhm,
single moment. That's what I consider submission is
mhm,
that you're just understanding the system you're in. You say,
mhm,
I'm just going to follow the
mhm,
basic rules,
mhm,
as you mentioned, the common sense that's
mhm,
kind of laid out there.
mhm.
It's not too complicated, but
Yeah.
in relationships, I can see how, looking at history and the abuse of power and,
Mhm,
men may have been, well, I'm gonna hold the money and you know what? You get in that room and you take them drawers off and I'm gonna be in there
mhm,
in a second. And after we done, go make me some grits.
mhm.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've seen that personally.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, our families are pretty much all we know,
Mhm.
but I'm sure it exists somewhere. And as long as
Yeah.
that voice is telling their story, we're gonna come across it. And then
Mhm,
some people are gonna hear it and be like, "Yeah, I don't want any part of that. I'm gonna stay
mhm,
away from that." So
mhm,
I can definitely appreciate
mhm.
your sentiment.
Well, I actually have a question for you. In
Sure.
terms of submission and what you just described, do you feel like submission is also more so like just respect of like the boundaries that I guess this like there's just certain boundaries that we have like in society where it's like, you know what, I'm on your podcast, so I can't
Hmm.
just it would be very impolite for me to like just start playing music or just,
Yeah.
being loud and screaming or like getting upset at you. Like it would just be too much. Do you
Yeah.
feel like submission is sort of just respect and respecting like this person or respecting the space you're in or the environment you're in?
That's facts.
Mhm,
And again, like the English language it can be so complicated where
mhm,
we have all these in certain contexts, all the words can mean the same thing, and we
mhm,
just interchange them. And say, "Bro, you're gonna respect me, bro. You're gonna submit to me."
mhm,
One sound bad, and like,
mhm,
what you mean? I'm gonna submit to you. You will respect me. My experience with women, the women that have respected me or admired me, especially
mhm,
ones coming from YouTube and what have you,
mhm,
it's a night and day experience. When a
mhm,
woman respects me, she
mhm,
treats me in a certain light. And
mhm,
again, it's not quantifiable, but I feel that junk. Like when
mhm,
men say they feel like a king, that's
mhm,
what I feel like when a woman respects me. Versus
mm,
when
okay.
I just met her on Tinder and she might be slightly a couple points above me. I'm like, bro, I just pulled this 10, bro, and she think I
Mhm,
got some bread.
mhm.
I got a credit card. That's all I got. I got a credit card,
Uh-huh.
and I'm running up a check. It's a different dynamic, and you kind of feel the
Okay.
pressure to try to
Mhm,
earn her respect or
mhm,
garner that respect.
mhm,
And so you try to be macho and masculine, like, but
Mhm.
she gonna see my mustache and she gonna see
Mhm.
I can do push-ups,
Uh-huh.
and you're constantly going out of your way to prove something. Whereas
Mhm.
if someone just respects you, there's a given dynamic. It feels good. It feels comfortable that
Mhm.
you feel comfortable enough to ask a question,
Mhm.
and then I feel comfortable enough to answer a question, and I don't feel threatened. You shouldn't feel
Mhm.
threatened.
Mhm.
I think that respect is what we're kind of referring to, and
Mhm.
different words get for the longest it's been called submission.
Mhm.
Men, the Bible, submit to your husbands
Mhm.
as he follows Christ or whatever.
Mhm.
And we take all of these words and we demonize them and we say, oh,
Mhm.
masculinity. It's
Mhm.
just, let's define the word masculinity.
Mhm.
But we throw qualifiers on there,
Yeah.
toxic masculinity or
Mhm.
misogyny. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
misogyny exists too, but we don't hear any content on that
Mhm.
outside of Fresh and Fit. Like
Yeah.
we have to go to
Yeah.
certain places to get certain words used.
Mhm.
And I think that's just the complexity of the English language of
Mhm.
how we just pick and choose certain words. This word has been demonized, so I'll use this word here
Mhm.
because I know it'll trigger her.
Mhm.
Versus this word means the same thing in this context,
Mhm.
but I could use respect or I could use cooperation,
Mhm.
but I'll use submission because I know in this context it's a little bit more triggering. And
Mhm.
I think that's the complexity of the human mind and how we're
Mhm.
able to navigate certain conversations is just
Mhm.
we know which words will trigger somebody versus
Yeah.
the other word that means the same exact thing.
Mhm. I mean, I agree with you, and I think context is everything too, as well.
Hmm.
Like you said, like there's certain words that like if I use it in this way, it's gonna get
Right.
her right, or as opposed to using a different word that would
Mm.
probably agree more with me. So I definitely hear exactly what you're saying.